the technical problems. The Facebook gremlins struck again. But if you've just joined us, well, good news, because we're going to start again for people who've come a little bit later. Now, this is the third episode of the Socialist Party's broadcast covering the general election. And this is your chance to be a bit more interactive with the show. We are taking questions from Facebook and Twitter, and you'll see the addresses for those on the bottom of the screen. Now, last week we discussed the leak of the Labour manifesto, and this week the Tory manifesto has come out to slightly less aplomb, shall we say, than the Labour Party manifesto. Now, Hannah, the Tories have decided to deal with the social care crisis in the most Tory way possible, which is by robbing your mum and dad of their home to pay for their care. It's not a great start for them, is it?
Certainly isn't. No, it's an incredible manifesto, the Tories, because normally, of course, they lie about what they're going to do when they're in power, and this time they've told a little bit of the truth. What they're doing on the winter fuel allowance, they haven't yet said how many people will be affected. But if you take the figures of everybody who doesn't get any benefit as a pensioner, then you're talking about 9 million, something like that, pensioners that will lose the winter fuel allowance. And that will mean pensioners not having heating with all the terrible consequences of that. And then, as you just referred to, the social care issue. You think about what Thatcher sold to Britain, it was the idea of a property-owning democracy, that everyone was going to have their own little castle that they could pass on to their children. Now, we know it's a myth, it's in tatters. We're both generation rents that are not able to buy houses, and millions of young people are in that position. But now they're taking away even the right of parents who wanted to be able to pass on when they died their houses effectively to the next generation, or their asset. That has been taken away as well in order to pay for social care. And no surprise that the Tories have gone down in the polls this week. It's extremely arrogant of them to think they can say this and get elected. It really is what Jeremy Corbyn said about the nasty party, which is, of course, what May once said about her own party, and she's now setting out to prove. Meanwhile, we've had the official launch of Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, which has many good things in it. We discussed that last week. I'm not going to go over them all. But clearly, free education, £10 an hour minimum wage, renationalisation of some of the privatised utilities, these are popular policies. And no surprise, the opposite effect of the Tory manifesto, Labour are going up in the polls, and they can win this election. And the Socialist Party is doing everything we can to make sure that Jeremy Corbyn is in number 10 after the general election. But I suppose one of the things we have to discuss today is, why isn't he 20 points ahead? I mean, he can win, but he's coming up from behind. And yet, since 2010, the richest 1,000 people in this country have doubled their wealth, while we've all suffered endless austerity. And Jeremy Corbyn's policies address that. So why isn't he further ahead? Of course, there's all kinds of reasons for it. But fundamental ones are the role of the Blairites, the right wing of the Labour Party, who are openly trying to sabotage this election campaign, but also have a whole legacy that when they were in power, they privatised, they introduced tuition fees, they went to war. At local level, they carry out cuts in public services. And that means there's an enormous, reasonable cynicism amongst working class people. Is any politician going to change things? Does Jeremy really represent something different? Now, he can overcome that, but that's an objective obstacle that he's facing in this election campaign.
Yeah, when I was campaigning yesterday, in fact, we were discussing Labour's manifesto, and they said they didn't believe the thing about the housing because, well, Labour didn't give any, didn't build any houses when they were in power. And I suppose for some people, why are we in this situation where you've got a big majority or a big section of the Parliamentary Labour Party are running around, not mentioning Jerry Corbyn's name, people like Ben Bradshaw being lukewarm on the manifesto, and in the Socialist Party we've just recently released a book by Peter Taff, our General Secretary. It's called From Militant to the Socialist Party. You can see it here, and it's a history of our own party, but it's also a history of the time, and particularly of how Blairism developed within the Labour Party, and how we've in a way got to where we are at the moment with the Labour Party and with this kind of two parties in one, if you like, that we have in Labour. So we're going to play a clip from an interview with the author Peter Taff here. Hopefully, if there's no technical difficulties, it should be coming up right now.
Okay, well, I'm here today with Peter Taff, who's the General Secretary of the Socialist Party. Welcome to everyone who's watching. My name's Claire. Peter is the author of a number of books, including The Rise of Militants, which some of you may have read. And he's here to talk about the general election, which is upcoming, and what that means for socialists and for people who are involved in the workers' movements, but also to talk about a book which is out this week, which he's recently written. It's called From Militant to the Socialist Party, and it follows on from where The Rise of Militant left off. So welcome, Peter. Peter, can you tell us a little bit about why this book is relevant now? What is it that makes it such an important read for workers and young people who are involved in the struggle for socialism in 2017?
Well, in a way, it's accidental that it's coming out now in the middle of a general election, but it's very appropriate because it's dealing with the period from 1995 to 2007, which was a period, if you like, which had both Labour and Tory governments, both of which were incapable of solving the problems of working people. And it charts the history of militants, which became today the Socialist Party. And we've got a tremendous history. In over 50 years, we've been involved in all the major struggles and battles of the working people, of the young people, and so on. For instance, in Liverpool, between 1983 and 1987, in the poll tax, and on both occasions, we beat Margaret Thatcher. Now, it's relevant also because it deals with the period of the last Labour government, which was an abject failure, which was a period under Blair of privatisation, and that's why it's relevant to this general election, because it's a breath of fresh air that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour manifesto has gone back to the basic ideas of socialism, of nationalisation, and what is that except the recognition that the old idea of privatisation, of selling off our industries and our wealth to the highest rich bidder, that's coming to an end if Jeremy Corbyn is elected in the general election on June the 8th. So it's very relevant. It's relevant to the past, but it's also relevant to the future as well.
So why do you think it is that Jeremy Corbyn's getting this fantastic support at the moment?
Well, because of the conditions that exist in Britain. It's not rocket science. You only have to open any newspaper to see that wages are stagnant. In fact, they are more stagnant since 2007 than at any other previous period for 200 years. That's an incredible situation where nurses cannot live on their wages, many going to food banks. In my own hometown of Birkenhead, there's something like 10,000 people using food banks regularly. So we have this ocean of poverty, and people feel that nobody has represented them up to now. Now they feel a glimmer of hope. That's got to be turned into certainty that this offers a new road. It means we have no alternative but to confront big business. And it's very good what Corbyn and the manifesto says in relation to taxing the rich. We're in favour of a tax on the rich. But it's not just a wealth tax. It's not just a question of taking from the rich. It's a question of taking over what the Labour movement in the past called the means of production. That's the big factories, not every fish and chip shop, not small corner shops, but the big monopolies that control 85% of the wealth. If they were taken over, and the press is now screaming, you're not costing your programme. We refuse to get involved, arguing over pennies and shillings about how much compensation will be paid. Okay, we're in favour. If rail, for instance, is nationalised, what right have the rich shareholders to be compensated from the misery that they are inflicting daily on ordinary people? Give them compensation, but on the basis of proven need, maybe on the disability allowance, which many workers are protesting about at the present time. On the basis of proven need, the big boys should get nothing. The banks should get nothing. They have ruined the industry of Britain. We've paid out a fortune since 2007. If you don't believe me, look at Mervyn King's recent book on alchemy and the financial system. He admits there the rackets, the fiddling, the rigging, as Jeremy Corbyn has put it, of capitalism. So we say this can all be afforded, but not within the confines of capitalism. It has to be by putting forward a socialist program. Then we can open up a new road. What does that mean? It means a socialist plan of production. The question of housing for young people above all. The cancellation of tuition fees and so on. These are basic points, but they can be introduced if there's a will and if there's a program to change society. Now, it won't change overnight on June the 9th, but it opens up a new beginning. Once you raise the question of nationalisation, that means the appetite will grow with eating. Once people see the effects of an industry being nationalised, like for instance in 1945, when the miners marched to work with red flags when their industry was taken over. The same with the railways and so on. Once that develops, then the idea of other industries being taken over. That's why there's such a frenzy in the capitalist media, not just in the newspapers, but in the television and so on. Corbyn is reflecting this mood. The old discredited Blairites are reflecting the mood of yesteryear, of yesterday. They want to remain within the confines of capitalism. We want to break with capitalism. We want to open up a new revolutionary road, if you like, in the sense of an organisation and a society that benefits working people and doesn't punish them as this society is doing at the present time.
Okay, well, Peter's obviously prompted a few questions. We've had a couple come in. We've had one or two, possibly supporters of ours, a bit tough ones, but that's okay. We'll still take them. So we've got one here coming from Kevin on the email, and he wants to know, we know you don't like New Labour, but you have to admit at least they knew how to win elections.
Well, this is an example of history being written by the victors, because the Blairites gained control of the Labour Party, and so now there's this mythology being created that 97 showed you've got to have the middle ground, moderate policies, and then you can win elections. But actually, even 97, of course, millions of people were very pleased to get rid of the Tories, but it was not the landslide that it has become in history. You know, so I think the turnout was lower. It was the lowest since 1945. And Labour's share of the popular vote was lower than 1945. So there was a big swing to Labour, but there were still millions of people who stayed at home because they weren't inspired by anything. And frankly, that any of the main parties were saying, and frankly, anybody, any Labour leader could have defeated the Tories at that point in time. Because after the recession that had taken place, the movement in defence of the pits, which involved big sections of the middle class, there was real anger at the Tories. And anybody could have won that general election. Actually, Labour could have won in 92. It was close, but I think 11.5 million people voted Labour. Now, I'm one of the people who was expelled from the Labour Party for helping to organise the mass movement against the poll tax. 18 million people refused to pay Thatcher's vicious tax, and that was what got rid of Maggie Thatcher and could have led to Labour winning that election with a landslide. But Labour councils were opposing non-payment and jailing non-payers, and people organising the non-payment movement like me were kicked out of the Labour Party. So, 18 million didn't pay, 11.5 million voted Labour. Look at the difference. And then since then, every election, Labour lost votes. The turnout went down, 5 million people stopped voting for Labour, and that's because they wanted something different, and what they got were Tory-like policies, introducing tuition fees, privatisation of public services, the Iraq war, all the rest of it. The only way that Labour could win an election now is actually with radical, different policies. People don't want a continuation of New Labour. So it's a mythology that's been created, but I don't think it's accurate that New Labour knew how to win elections. On the contrary, they lost votes.
Well, exactly. And of course, the man who managed not to win the election on the back of the poll tax, Neil Kinnock, now sees he's fit to give advice to Jeremy Corbyn about how to win an election. Another question, which I think maybe speaks to what you were saying about why isn't 20 points ahead, is from Laura, and she asks, aren't we just in this situation because the working class became apathetic and frankly doesn't care about politics, no matter how much you wish it did?
No, I don't. I understand why that's been asked, because if you're out campaigning to get Jeremy Corbyn elected at the moment, like we are, it is frustrating when you have people walk past you and go, oh, they're all the same. But I don't think that reflects apathy as much as anger. it reflects people's experience of MPs that have only represented in their mass the elite in society. Mandelson, the famous Blairite quote, the Labour were intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. As I said before, privatising public services, the housing crisis getting worse, introducing tuition fees, all of the things that Labour did in power, even the question of the banks. The Tories claim that Labour were rash because they allowed the banking system to crash. And Labour are correct when they say it was a world crisis of capitalism, not the policies of New Labour. But at the same time, Gordon Brown stepped in and effectively nationalised a big chunk of the banking system, but he did it in the interests of the bankers. It was socialism for the rich, and the rest of us got austerity. That doesn't make you popular. So people are angry about all of that, angry about the expenses scandal, and we have to convince them that there's something worth going out and voting for. I mean, I'd just add that for us in the Socialist Party, any publicly elected representatives, whether in the trade unions or in Parliament or the council chamber that we have, always only take a worker's wage. And that is part of showing people that we are not in this for ourselves, but we're in this to fight in the interests of ordinary working class people.
Okay, well, we've got another question here from Steve, possibly a supporter of ours. Why have you abandoned standing in the election, says Steve, disappointed. We're not standing this time.
As Steve says, we're not standing in this general election. We're part in the Socialist Party of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, which was founded by socialists, ourselves, and trade unionists, particularly the RMT, the Transport Workers Union, and Bob Crow, who is the late General Secretary of that union. And it was founded because of the feeling that working class people have no mass party that represents them, and want a banner under which they can contest elections to be against austerity, against privatisation, pro-working class. So that's why Tusk was founded. It plays a very important role. It's continuing to play an important role. So, for example, in the council elections that have just taken place, we did stand candidates against some of the most right-wing, Blairite, anti-Jeremy Corbyn, pro-cuts in public services local councillors. But our attitude has always been that what we want is a mass party that represents working class people. Now, Labour's not that yet, because of all the Blairites, because it is two parties in one. But Jeremy Corbyn represents a real step forward. So when we came to discussing this general election, what can we do most effectively? We felt it would be a mistake to stand ourselves, because we want to focus on trying to make sure that Jeremy Corbyn is elected, is in number 10, and that can be a step towards the creation of a party that really does represent working class people in Britain.
And of course, one of the reasons perhaps another is 20 points ahead is because at a local level, Labour are implementing cuts, and that's an issue. Our next question comes in from Mo in London, and Mo's got two very good questions actually. The first one is, how can London bus workers organise to bring back into public ownership the buses?
Okay, no, it's a very good question. I mean, and it's important not just for bus workers, but for all industry that should be brought into public ownership, including the things that Jeremy's promising to do. Because it's absolutely clear, big business don't want anything. They're making big profits out of water, out of Royal Mail. They don't want any of those things brought back into public ownership. And to succeed in achieving it will require a mass popular movement in support of it. And that will include bus workers organising as trade unionists, organising demonstrations, protests, strike action if necessary, but also mobilising to explain to passengers why public ownership would be a much better thing. So I think it's a good question, because this is not just about who you put in number 10. If we're going to change society, it's going to require a popular movement, and particularly a movement of the working class as well.
Okay, and we'll take one more question from Mo, and that is, Corbyn's socialist policies are popular. Labour MPs have not campaigned. What problems?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a big question. I probably haven't got time to fully deal with it, but I think it's clear to all of us that the right wing in the Labour Party have not become Jeremy Corbyn supporters in the course of this election campaign. On the contrary, before the election, Peter Mandelson was saying, I've been dreaming of a general election as an opportunity to defeat Jeremy Corbyn. And what they actually want is Labour to lose badly, so that then they can justify splitting away and setting up a new party, if they're not able to unseat Jeremy Corbyn, because they want Labour to be a safe party for the 1%, for big business, and not a party that puts forward socialist policies. So in our view, whatever happens in the election, then Jeremy and the left of the Labour Party need to draw conclusions for the future, and that means democratising the Labour Party. Some of the things that weren't introduced before this election, in our view, a vain attempt to compromise with the right. Things like the democratic mandatory reselection of MPs, so local Labour Party members can choose an MP who actually represents what they think. Opening up the party to allow socialists like ourselves to join. Those policies will be essential in the aftermath of the general election, because you can't continue forever with these two parties in one. Much better to have a party that represents the interests of the majority and let the Blairites and the right wing go and put forward their pro-capitalist policies in a separate party.
Well, let's hope the general election turns Mandelson's dream into a nightmare with a Labour government implementing radical policies. We're going to play another clip now from Peter Taff from his interview. Waiting for our computer to fire up. Not willing to do, so I'm going to have to do a bit of running this to get it going. Oh, and now it's flashing up funny messages at me, which you never like when you're after an operating computer. Carry on. Oh.
So Peter, you just mentioned Tony Blair, and obviously Tony Blair has recently made an appearance in the news as trying to return to politics. You're obviously a veteran of the fight against Blairism. How do you think that's likely to develop over the next period?
Well, it's not an accident, is it, Claire, that Blairism in Britain, that led the way really for the Social Democrats worldwide to move towards the right, to expunge socialism from the constitutions of different workers' parties and so on. And now Blair is utterly discredited in Britain for the Iraq War, but not just for the Iraq War. We have to remember, he admits in his biography, the closest he came to being toppled from power was over tuition fees. In the vote that took place in the House of Commons over the introduction of this measure. He's never been forgiven for that, nor of the Liberal Democrats. That represents the greatest betrayal of youth that we've seen probably since 1945, together with the wars that he conducted and so on. So that chapter is over. They can only have a very limited existence inside the Labour Party. They probably, if they don't get their way, split from the Labour Party in the aftermath of the election, or we should kick them out. And in the course of that movement, the Labour Party, these two parties would then develop into two parties in actual fact. One, a pro-capitalist party outside the Labour Party, probably linking up with the Liberals or a section of the Liberals, even with a section of Tories to form a so-called New Centre party, and then we can get on with the real business of discussing amongst ourselves the best way to move towards socialism.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's been extremely exciting to talk about the book with you. And I hope that everyone viewing this video has enjoyed it. Hopefully it will have whet your appetite to buy a copy of the book. And if you would like to purchase a copy of Peter's book, it's available on socialistbooks.co.uk. And of course, if you'd like the opportunity to meet Peter in person, perhaps to discuss with him, to ask some questions, then the London Socialist Party will be hosting an official book launch, and of course there'll be an opportunity to get Peter to sign your book as well, so it would be great if you would like to come along. That's on Thursday the 25th of May, and it's going to be in Bloomsbury Baptist Church at 7:30 in the evening, and we really hope to see you there.
Good event. I'll be going. You heading along?
Unfortunately, I can't, but it is going to be an excellent meeting and everybody should go.
Okay, well, we've had a few questions actually on the same issue, which people want to know. You've been trying to join the Labour Party, but they don't seem to want you, do they?
Okay. This is a popular question, and it's true that myself and I think 74 other expelled socialists, so people who had been in the Labour Party, and then as part of its move to the right and the domination of the Blairites, were expelled from the Labour Party. Most of us were supporters of the militants and now members of the Socialist Party. We applied to rejoin, and I had a correspondence with the General Secretary of the Labour Party, which wasn't him saying, "Oh yes, come in, you're very welcome," on the contrary. And it's clear to us, I mean, We said at the time, if you expel the militant tendency, it's the thin end of the wedge. It will be the start of transforming Labour into a capitalist party. And that is what happened. Not that there were no socialists left. Jeremy Corbyn was still an MP who was a socialist, and there were a handful of others, but they were like prisoners, smuggling out a few notes from the bars for a whole period. So we were kicked out as part of that, but we think now Labour should go back to its roots. Labour was founded as a federation involving trade unionists, different socialist organisations, some of the forerunners of the Communist Party, who came together and discussed and debated socialist ideas, between some who would have, like us, thought it was necessary to nationalise the commanding heights of the economy, the big companies that dominate the economy, and others who thought you could get socialism gradually with a little bit of nationalisation, but came together all pushing for socialism, discussing and debating ideas, and building the Labour Party. Now that's long gone. Although there are remnants of it left, one of my arguments with the General Secretary Ian McNichol was him saying, you can't join because you're in the Socialist Party, and me saying, but the Co-op Party are a separate party that are affiliated to the Labour Party, because the difference with the Co-op Party is they're right-wing, and therefore they're allowed to join, and that's what this is about. It's about ideas. And no surprise that people like Tom Watson on the right of the party, this is not an exact quote, but basically said, over my dead body, are the Socialist Party members going to be allowed to join the Labour Party or the Socialist Party to affiliate? That is part of the battle that's taking place in the Labour Party between the right-wing capitalist wing and the potential anti-austerity party around Jeremy Corbyn. Let's see what happens after the general election. But our view is, in the Socialist Party, we will support every possible step towards the creation of a Labour Party which is a mass party of working class people that stands on a socialist policy, and we want that party to be democratised and to allow the Socialist Party and other socialist organisations to participate. So that's what we'll fight towards, but first we've got the general election. First we need to try and get Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, and that's our task in the course of the next weeks. So.
Okay, well thanks Hannah for discussing with us today. But also thanks very much to all the people who watched today, who were patient with some of our technical difficulties. I hope it was worth it in the end to stick with us. I'd particularly like to thank the people who sent in questions and helped kick off a really good discussion. We'll be coming back at the same time next week at 1 p.m. on Sunday to discuss the latest aspects of the general election. Please like and share this video. You can also find out more about the Socialist Party at our website and on our Facebook and Twitter, which you'll see the addresses scrolling along at the bottom. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the weekend, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.